Good afternoon, and welcome to the Wednesday afternoon conference call with Trusts Unlimited. This is Jim George speaking. I'm the non-attorney spokesman and facilitator for Trusts Unlimited, and I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time to listen to this call, particularly those of you that are calling in for the first time and those that will be listening to the replay over the next 24 to 48 hours. We like to move quickly through these calls and bottom line the information for you. I did plan to do a full call today, but I did have a personal issue come up that has to be dealt with this afternoon. So we're going to have a shorter call here today. But again, for our newer callers, all of our replay calls can be found on YouTube. You would go to YouTube, and then you would type in trustsunlimitedllc.com, and then you could get whatever conference dates you want to listen to. I would suggest you listen to the replay of March 30th and or April 6th. They were both long calls the last 2 weeks, and they had some good Q&As in there as well. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the situation with the reinstitution and revaluation of the Iraqi dinar. First, by way of disclaimer, Trusts Unlimited is not the purveyor of the dinar and these other currencies. We're not advocating either the sale or purchase of these currencies, but as rather substantial currency holders ourselves, we're sharing with you the information we believe to be relevant. And of course, the most relevant piece of information would be the potential window for the reinstitution and then revaluation of the Iraqi dinar. Despite the confusion in Iraq right now, in our view, the Iraqi dinar could literally reinstitute at any time. I'm going to get into this a little bit more specifically. I'm going to break it down into what's going on in country in Iraq as we speak, and then I'm going to get into global issues which will have at least an indirect, if not a direct effect on the reinstitution and revaluation of the dinar. First, in country, let's talk a little bit about what I referred to earlier, a little bit of the confusion. We do have somewhat of a parliamentary stalemate right now, and the new government has not been formed. That is largely because of the election delay. They had the elections last year in October, but of course they were challenged. No one seemed to think that the challenges were valid, and it turns out that after several months of going through this, the courts agreed. The election was certified, but that did postpone routine parliamentary procedures for the new government. Now, the end result of the election was that the Sadrists had the largest number of seats through the election, but the coalition framework, which was a loosely and fragilely established coalition between the moderate and more radical Shia, collectively do have more seats, and so we have a parliamentary stalemate. So the Sadrists decided that they were going to give the coalition framework 40 days to form a new government. Now, a lot of people thought this was not a good thing, and that the Sadrists had basically surrendered their authority. The parliamentary system is very complicated. And then if you add to that the parliamentary system of Iraq, which is even more complicated, and if you add to that the tribal and sectarian issues that are involved as well, it is very difficult. It's a Rubik's Cube, and it's hard to put the thing back together. But after giving it some thought, I actually think what the Sadrists have done is very Machiavellian, because I think what they believe is that the Shia are going to have a hard time even agreeing among themselves about exactly what they want to do, because you have the moderate Shia, the Ibadis and people of that ilk, and then you have Maliki, who I really shouldn't classify him as anything other than a self-serving, corrupt official, but you have the more radical Shia. And within the radical Shia are a group called the 12th Imamers. And if you want to understand just how radical these people are, you can Google Shia and you can Google Sunni, the two largest religious factions within Islam, and then you can Google 12th Imamers, which is the most radical faction of the radical Shia, and you will understand why Maliki might well think that the moderates and the 12th Imam or Shia are not going to be able to agree on just about anything. But despite all of that confusion, there are some positive things, which is why the reinstitution of the dinar could literally happen at any time. First, while the coalition framework is trying to form a new government, who's running the affairs of the country? The caretaker government, meaning that Salih remains as president of the republic and Kadhimi remains the prime minister. And these are two white hats. These are good guys that want to get things done. In addition, despite the issues in Parliament, they are calling for the government to present the 2022 budget. So they are attempting to proceed with business as usual. Now, a lot of people are concerned and they say, well, there are issues in the Parliament. The budget may not get passed for some time, so how can the currency reinstitute? In my opinion, the reinstitution of the dinar has literally nothing to do with the budget. As a matter of fact, you can make an argument that it would be better to reinstitute the currency prior to passing the budget at the program rate. We have to also remember that the CBI is still an independent agency within the government, and they constitutionally have the unilateral authority to change the exchange rate. Now, the Parliament did establish, as you know, the Finance Committee to, quote-unquote, oversee the operations of the CBI. But remember, the Finance Committee is basically a collection of unelected officials who have no constitutional authority to do what they're doing. The fact that the Parliament has authorized their existence does not mean that what they're doing is not extra constitutional, meaning that the CBI can basically ignore them. In addition, we know that the CBI has spent tens of millions of dollars in order to produce the new small currency notes and the fills, which serve absolutely no purpose without a Basel III compliant exchange rate. And I'm not talking about going from $14.50 to $11.90. I'm talking about going to north of $3. Some say north of $4. Some say possibly even as high as $5. Lastly, in addition to all of those in-country issues, we have a lot of things going on globally which not only affect the Iraqi dinar, but affect some of these other pre-valued currencies, and in fact, all currencies. First, we have the issue of corruption, which is being dealt with. A lot of these corrupt officials in Iraq have smuggled the 3-0 provisional currency out of the country and deposited a lot of funds in Lebanese banks. Well, those funds have been confiscated. So why would that be important? If the currency is not going to reinstitute and revalue, there's no need to take the money out of the country because the 3 zeros are going to be there, whether it's in country or out of country, and the exchange rate, the new exchange rate doesn't exist. So the only reason you would confiscate those funds is because you're anticipating a change in the exchange rate, and provisional currency that's outside of Iraq would enjoy the 3 zeros as opposed to Iraqi national in country where the 3 zeros would not be recognized. The second issue is the negotiations that should be consummated shortly between Iraq and China with regard to the Silk Road Initiative. As you know, China is very aggressively pursuing the Silk Road. It's going to be a massive international trade highway from the Far East all the way into Europe, and of course it necessarily has to go through Iraq. Now, why would Iraq be so interested in negotiating this without having an international currency? Without their own international currency, they would continue to operate with the U.S. dollar, which is their reserve currency. Now, they have a sufficient supply of U.S. dollar reserve currency in order to run their government, but they do not have a sufficient supply of reserve currency to run their government, to pay the international contracts, to rebuild their infrastructure, and to conduct global trade. They're going to need to revalue their currency. And lastly, and this is an odd situation, but the invasion of the Ukraine by Putin actually, in a backhanded way, could trigger this transition globally from fiat to Basel III compliant currencies. Putin went into the Ukraine. The Western nations instituted a series of sanctions with regard to the sale of their oil. The ruble began to plummet. In response, Putin did a couple of things. First, he said those that wish to buy our oil will need to do so using the ruble, and the European nations are still buying oil because they have to. The United States stopped. We were actually in a situation where we could produce more than enough oil we needed so we could export oil to Europe. Now that the Biden administration, in their quote-unquote wisdom, has stopped the production in a number of ways, the Europeans were forced to purchase oil from Russia, and they continue to do so, even though Russia had invaded the Ukraine. But the important part is this. Not only will these European nations now need to purchase oil from Russia using the ruble, but the ruble has almost regained all of its value in short order because Putin has backed the ruble with gold. So what Putin may have actually done is kick-started the transition globally from fiat-based to Basel III compliant currencies in order to be competitive. And this is what Iraq is going to have to do as well. So again, in a backhanded way, what Putin has done by backing his ruble with gold and by requiring people purchasing his oil with the ruble may have actually begun the domino process for all of these other nations, including Iraq, to go Basel III compliant. So for all of these reasons, the reinstitution of the dinar could happen at any time. Now, for those of you that would be kind enough to go to our call of, as I said, March 30th or April 6th, you will get a detailed explanation of the program we put in place to assist you. It's critical for you to understand this information. I'm going to touch just very briefly on it for you. But first, I want to give you our contact information. You can go to our website, which is trusts with an S, unlimitedllc.com. Our email address is trusts with an S, unlimitedllc@gmail.com. Our phone service is 307-274-4122. Again, if you'd like to listen to one of the conference call playbacks, you would go to YouTube. You would then type in our website, which is, again, trusts with an S, unlimitedllc.com, and then all of our weekly calls will pop up, and you can select whatever date or dates you want to listen to. And our call, again, of March 3rd and April 6th, I strongly recommend that you listen to, but I just want to touch on a couple of things briefly with regard to these trusts. By establishing our trust, not only for those of you that have currencies, but those of you that simply want to protect your wealth, I want to talk about some of the benefits that these trusts will provide, whether you have currencies or not. The first issue is privacy. For example, if a forensic accountant or a private investigator was doing a background check on you, they would utilize all the available information, including your Social Security number. Even a government agency could do that. However, not only would they not know that the trust exists because that operates under a separate EIN number, but even if they know that the trust exists, they cannot find out what's inside that trust, what you've protected within that trust without probable cause, and they'd need to go to a court to establish that. Second issue would be asset protection, particularly those of you that are of substantial means or those that have currencies. Post-RV, you're going to have a substantial amount of wealth. Well, statistically, 1 out of 4 millionaires is sued in their lifetime. And it's estimated that somewhere between 40 and 45% of those lawsuits are frivolous, meaning the case is extremely weak and the prospective plaintiff just wants you to give him some money to go away. Well, once these individuals, whether it's legitimate or not, or whether it's a frivolous lawsuit, finds out the cost and delay involved up front in order to pursue civil litigation, it's very doubtful litigation would proceed. Third issue has to do with tax deferral. Pursuant to Sections 988E2 and Section 643A and B of the Internal Revenue Code, there are certain tax advantages to having tangible assets bought and sold within our trust package. Now, once the currency reinstitutes, we will be going to the IRS to get confirmation as to the tax deferral on the exchange itself. But even without that, there are substantial tax advantages, again, to placing your assets in a trust package such as ours. In addition, it would be easy to transfer assets from our trust to other offshore entities if you wish to do so. The government is becoming extremely more intrusive, and it feels as though they're creating some sort of a surveillance state. But once again, it's much more difficult to ascertain what an individual owns if it's in a trust package such as ours. So again, I would strongly suggest that those of you, whether you hold currencies or not, who have assets and want to protect your privacy, protect yourself from civil litigation, and protect yourself from a surveillance state, strongly suggest you contact us, get our initial package. You're under no obligation to do so, although the package does contain everything you need if you decide to establish a trust package to protect your wealth. In addition, you can contact us by phone or email if you have any questions. We'll be happy to assist you. There will be no consultation fee. Again, thanks so much for listening to our call. We will be back next Wednesday. Certainly, if something of a dramatic nature were to happen between now and then, we will try to get out an emergency email and schedule an emergency conference call. But failing that, we will be back next week, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Thanks for listening, everyone, and have a great week. Bye-bye.